Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Wyenberg. This time we'll continue our reading of Village Centenary by Miss Reed. Like most people in Fairacre, my pupils enjoyed feeding the birds during the winter, and our school bird table was always well supplied with bread, peanuts, and fat. As well as these more usual offerings, Mrs. Pringle supplied mealworms, which the robins adored. She had first undertaken this chore when our famous albino robin appeared on the scene. After his death, in the grievous state of mourning which followed, the supply of mealworms ceased, but to our delight a second albino, probably a grandchild of the first, was seen, and the mealworms were hastily added to the menu. Not that we saw a great deal of the second white robin. It was obviously less bold than its predecessor and more cautious in its approach to the food we put out. As Henry Maughan had warned us, the robins and other birds of normal coloring would tend to harass the albino. It certainly seemed timid, but was all the more adored by the children on that account. The first robin had frequently come to the jar of mealworms during the day. The second one only came occasionally, and there were days when it did not appear at all. One afternoon the children were busy making what they termed bird puddin', which consisted of melted dripping mixed with porridge oats, chopped peanuts, and some currants. We had melted the fat in an old saucepan on the tortoise stove, and I kept a weather eye on the door in case Mrs. Pringle should walk in unexpectedly and catch us violating her beloved stove. There was a comfortable smell of cooking in the classroom as Patrick stirred the ingredients with my wooden jam-making spoon. The saucepan by now was on the floor. Nevertheless, when the door opened, I nearly jumped out of my skin with guilt. Luckily, it was only the vicar. "I seem to have startled you," said the Reverend Gerald Partridge. "I suppose I should have knocked." "Not at all. I just thought you were Mrs. Pringle." "Mrs. Pringle?" echoed the vicar. A look of the utmost perplexity distorted his chubby face. "Now, why on earth should you think that?" "I'll tell you later," I said hastily. "Can I help you?" The vicar put the plastic bag he had been carrying on my desk. "A friend of mine who is in the publishing business has most kindly given me some children's books. I think he said he was remaindering them, a term I had not heard before, I must confess. Anyway, I thought they might go on the library shelf here." "Oh, splendid! We can always do with more books." He began to haul them out of the bag, which bore the interesting slogan, "Come to Clarissa's for countless cosmetics." It seemed an odd receptacle for a vicar to have acquired. "I have looked through them," he said earnestly, "and they seem quite suitable. Really, these days, one can find the most unnecessarily explicit descriptions of deeds of violence or of biological matters too advanced for our young children here." "I'm sure your friend wouldn't give you anything like that," I said reassuringly, "but I will read them first if you like." "It might be as well," said the vicar. He suddenly became aware of Patrick's activities. "Whatever is the boy making?" I explained, the children joining in with considerable gusto. "Well, I heartily approve," he said when he could make himself heard. "We must do all we can to keep the birds healthy and strong during this bitter weather." He began to walk to the door, and I accompanied him. He spoke in a low voice. "Are you sure that mixture is all right? It looks most indigestible to me." "The birds lap it up," I told him. "They've been doing so for months now, so don't worry." He smiled and departed. I had barely returned to the stove preparatory to cleaning away any mess before Miss Pringle caught us, when the vicar reappeared again. "I forgot to give you a message from my wife. Could you come to the vicarage for a drink on Friday at 6:30? A few people are coming to discuss the arrangements for the Caxley Spring Festival." "Thank you. Yes, please, I should love to come," I said. He said good-bye for the second time, and we set about the stove with guilty speed. Mrs. Pringle's name had not been mentioned by anyone in the classroom, but we all knew what lent energy to our efforts. That evening my old friend Amy rang me. We first met at college many years ago, and the friendship has survived separation, a war, Amy's marriage, and the considerable differences in our views and temperaments. Amy is all the things I should like to be: elegant, charming, good-looking, intelligent, rich, and much traveled. I can truthfully say that I do not envy her married state, for I am perfectly content with my single one, and in any case James, although a witty and attractive man, is hopelessly susceptible, and seems to fall in love at the drop of a hat, which Amy must find tiresome, to say the least. "Come and have supper," I invited when she proposed to visit me one evening in the near future. "Love to, but I must warn you that I'm slimming." "Not again!" I exclaimed. That would have been better left unsaid. "Sorry, but honestly, Amy, you are as thin as a rail now. Why bother?" My scales, which like the camera never lie, tell me that I have put on 3/4 of a stone since November. I can't believe it. It's true, though, so don't offer me all those lovely things on toast that you usually do. Bread is out. What else? Oh, the usual, you know, starch, sugar, fat, alcohol, and the rest. Is there anything left? Amy giggled. Well, lettuce is a real treat, and occasionally a small orange, and I can have eggs and fish and lean meat in moderation. The whole thing sounds too damn moderate for me. What would you say to pork chops, roast potatoes, and cauliflower with white sauce, followed by chocolate mousse and cream? Don't be disgusting, said Amy. I'm drooling already. But a nice slice of rye vita and half an apple would be just the thing. I'll join you in the pauper's repast, I promised nobly, and rang off. Chapter 2, February. I remembered my promise to Miss Clare and brought her over to tea on the 1st of the month. A gentle thaw had set in, and the snow had almost vanished. It tended to turn foggy at night, and the roads were still filthy, with little rivulets running at the sides, but it was good to have milder weather during the daytime, and a great relief to let the children run in the playground at break. Under the garden hedge a few brave snowdrops showed. I had picked a bunch for the tea table, and the purity of the white flowers contrasted with the dark mottled leaves of the ivy with which I had encircled them. I was glad that I was not slimming like poor Amy as we munched our way through anchovy toast and sponge cake. After school I'm always ravenous, and how people can bear to go without afternoon tea and all the delightful ingredients which make it so pleasant, I do not understand. When we had cleared away, we set out on the first afternoon tea walk of the year. A few early celandines showed their shield-shaped leaves on the banks of the side of the lane, and it was wonderful to see green grass again after weeks of depressing whiteness. A lark sang bravely above, and blackbirds and thrushes fluttered among the bare hedges, scattering the pollen from the hazel catkins that nodded in the light breeze. In the paddock near Mr. Roberts' farmhouse, 60 or 70 ewes, heavy and lamb, grazed ponderously upon the newly disclosed grass. There was a wonderful feeling of new life in the air despite the naked trees, the bare-plowed fields, and the miry lanes we walked. "I know most people dislike the month of February," said Miss Clare as we returned, "but I always welcome it. With the shortest day well behind us and the first whiff of spring about, I begin to feel hopeful again." "Your mother was quite right," I told her. "Everyone should have an after-tea walk on February the 1st. It's the finest antidote to the January blues I've come across." Dolly Clare laughed and slipped her frail arm through mine. It was sharply borne in upon me how light and thin she had become during the last few years. Her bones must be as brittle as a bird's. Would my old friend survive to see the next spring? Would we share another 1st of February celebratory walk? I hoped with all my heart that we might. On the following Friday, I dutifully made my way to the vicarage. I had not heard any more about the Caxley Spring Festival, which the vicar had mentioned, and wondered exactly how our small downland village, some miles from the market town, would become involved. There were about 20 people in the Partridges' drawing-room, and only 2 were strangers to me. Diana Hale, wife of a retired schoolmaster, was there. Their house, Tyler's Row, once 4 shabby cottages, is one of the show places of our village, and she and her husband are tireless in their good works. I was pleasantly surprised, too, to see Miriam Quinn, who came to live in Fairacre a few years ago. She is a most efficient secretary to a businessman in Caxley, likes a quiet life, and is somewhat reserved. Like most newcomers to a village, I know that Miss Quinn was approached by most of the village organizers when she first took up residence at Holly Lodge on the outskirts of Fairacre, for her qualities of hard work and intelligence had gone before her, and everyone said, as I find to my cost as a spinster, that a single woman must have time on her hands and enjoy a nice bit of company. Holly Lodge is the home of Joan Benson, a sprightly widow, and she and her lodger seem very happy together. Joan was not at the meeting, and I wondered how it was that Miriam Quinn had been corralled with the rest of us. It was soon made clear. The vicar, who was acting as chairman, introduced the 2 strangers as the organizers of the festival in Caxley, and Miss Quinn as Fairacre's representative. We all sat back, sherry in hand, to listen obediently. The arts in Caxley, one of the strangers told us with some severity, were sadly neglected, and the proposed festival was to bring them to the notice of Caxley's citizens and all those who lived nearby. Let him add, he said, and who were we to stop him, that he was not accusing Caxley people of Philistinism or cruelty to creative artists, but merely of ignorance and apathy. There is a great fund of natural talent in Caxley, and its surrounds, he put in hastily, and there would be 2 plays by local playwrights put on at the Corn Exchange, several concerts at the parish church, and exhibitions of painting, embroidery, and other crafts at various large buildings in the town and outside. "What happens to the money?" Mr. Roberts, our local farmer, asked bluntly. Farmers are noted for their realistic approach to life, and ours is no exception. The speaker looked a little surprised by the interjection of such a materialistic inquiry in the midst of his eulogy about Caxley's artistic aspirations, but rallied bravely. "I was just coming to that. Any profits will go to 3 local charities, so that a great many people will benefit. They are named in the leaflets which we are distributing at this meeting." Mr. Roberts grunted in acknowledgment, and the speaker resumed his talk. Miriam Quinn's involvement was then revealed, and she gave a sensible description of her part in the festival. "I'm really here to get suggestions," she said. "One way of helping, particularly for us in the country, is by opening our gardens. The vicar has already offered to have his open, and so has Mr. Maughan. We can arrange a date to suit us all, and in May, when the festival takes place, our gardens here are at their best." "What about the school children having a maypole, dancing and singing and all that?" called out someone, well hidden from me. Miriam Quinn looked at me hopefully. "I'll think about it," I said circumspectly. What with the Centenary and the skylight waiting to be repaired, I had some reservations about a May Day celebration as well. "Beech Green had a street fair once," said somebody. "And only once," said her neighbor. "The traffic was something awful when Mr. Miller's tractor broke down where the road narrows." The vicar, adept at handling situations like this, suggested that any ideas might be given to Miss Quinn at the end of the meeting. He was quite sure, he added, that she would receive every possible support from Fairacre in the part the village would play in this excellent enterprise. Were there any more questions? At this, as always, silence fell upon the meeting. Sherry glasses were refilled, the guests circulated again, and we all knew, as we chattered of everything under the sun bar the matter at hand, that the Caxley Spring Festival would get plenty of attention once the meeting had dispersed. Amy paid her visit to me one evening when the wind was scouring the downs, whistling through keyholes and making the schoolhouse shudder beneath its onslaughts. Out in the garden, the bare branches tossed up and down, and dead leaves flurried hither and thither across the grass. Overhead, the rooks had battled their way home at dusk, finding it difficult to keep on course. But my fire burned brightly in the roaring draught, and Tibby, on his back, presented his stomach to the warmth, paws above his head. We were pretty snug within, whatever the weather did without. Amy arrived in a new suede coat of dark brown and some elegant shoes I had not seen before. She held a bowl of pink hyacinth in her hand. "Coals to Newcastle, I expect. I know you do well with bulbs." "Not a bit of it. Mine are over, and you couldn't have brought anything more welcome. Come in, Amy dear, out of this vile wind." She divested herself of the beautiful coat and exclaimed with pleasure at the fire. "I've been trying to do without one. After all, the central heating should really be enough. Heaven knows it costs a small fortune to run. But there's something rather soulless about the electric fire, which I'm forced to put on for an hour or two now and then." "Well, you know me, Amy. I light a fire at the drop of a hat. I can always console myself with the thought that I have no central heating to make me feel guilty." "I've felt the cold far more this winter," said Amy, stroking Tibby's stomach. "Whether it's Anno Domini or just this slimming business, I can't tell. A bit of each, I expect." "How's the poundage going?" "Much too slowly. If only I habitually drank gallons of beer or 8 pounds of chocolate, I should find it quite easy to cut down on the calories. But I eat like a bird." "Not worms, I hope. Don't be facetious, dear. You know what I mean. I'm heartily sick of salad and cold meat." "Well, that's what you've got tonight, unless you'd rather have a boiled egg." "Either would be delicious," said Amy, lying bravely. "Do you know, as a child I refused to eat salad, particularly tomatoes." "My bête noire was beetroot," I recalled. "Now I love it, and coffee. I couldn't touch it until we went to college. I'm sure tastes change as one goes through life." "They certainly do. But perhaps it's simply our aging digestive systems, do you think? I used to adore potted shrimps, but these days they go down like greased nails, and I have terrible indigestion." "We could have a nice bowl of thin gruel on our laps here," I remarked, "if you feel in such an advanced state of decay." "Not likely," said Amy. "Besides, gruel is fattening." Who was it that said that anything one enjoys turns out to be fattening or immoral? "No idea, but he knew what he was talking about," said Amy with feeling. Over our frugal repast, the conversation turned to Caxley's festival. I told Amy about Miss Quinn's part in it and our dearth of suggestions in Fairacre. "Well, in an expansive moment I agreed to have a poetry reading in my house. Do you think anyone will come?" "The poets will, presumably. That's just what I'm afraid of. I mean, I shall be stuck with half a dozen sensitive types, possibly all jealous of each other, and with no audience to listen to them. How can I be sure we get a nice, kind, attentive crowd?" "They'll come," I assured her. "Lots of people will simply come to see your house and garden, poets or no poets. Others will be culture vultures and game to listen to anything in the cause of art, and others will feel they can't waste the ticket." "And there are bound to be the poets' relations," agreed Amy, looking more hopeful. "I wonder if we could organize a group from the evening classes in Caxley. You know, the sort doing English literature? The Beowulf bunch, for instance." "Weave me the warp, the woof is wub sort of thing, you mean? I don't see why not. English literature classes should swell the audience nicely, and if you're short, I'll come and sit in the front row." "I'm counting on you anyway," said Amy, selecting a large stick of celery to pass round the sausage rolls. "You'll need something far more spiritual than sausage rolls," I told her. "You'll have to have nectar and ambrosia and lots of beaded bubbles winking at the brim for a poetry evening." "We'll have lashings of the latter," promised Amy, and crunched into the celery. It was still blowing a gale when Amy left me at about 9:30. I saw by the light of her headlamps that a sizable branch had been torn from the horse-chestnut tree in the garden, and the path was strewn with twigs and dead leaves. It was going to be pretty draughty sitting under that skylight tomorrow, I thought, if this weather continued. I sat down by the fire again and had a belated look at the daily papers. It was the usual conglomeration of strike threats, travel delays, violence, war, and sudden death, and the most peaceful reading was the crossword and the obituaries. The wind howled like a banshee, and I found it distinctly unnerving. With Amy for company, I had not noticed the vicious elements outside. Now, alone and responsible for any damage done, I became unusually jittery. A cupboard door by the fireplace creaked slowly open, and I felt my blood pressure rising. Would a yellow claw-like hand with immensely long nails, Chinese fashion, appear round it? Or a black hand perhaps holding a dagger? Or a white one dangling a knuckle-duster? You've read too many Bloods, I thought, and steeled myself to shut the door firmly. At the same moment, Tibby rose, fur bristling, and advanced toward the kitchen door, growling horribly. I watched him, mesmerized. Could someone have broken in? Had I locked the back door earlier? Probably not. We are a trusting lot in Fairacre, and under cover of the appalling racket outside, it would be quite easy for someone to gain entry. What should I do? Should I ring the Caxley police? Should I arm myself with a poker and fight it out? Reason told me that any burglar, no matter how puny, could easily twist a weapon out of my grasp and use it to belabor me. Surely I had read somewhere that it was best to offer no resistance. After all, hospitals were severely overcrowded without unnecessary casualties awaiting admission. If it were money the intruder wanted, he was going to be unlucky. I might rustle up £3 or so, but that would be the most I could find in the schoolhouse at short notice. True, Aunt Clara's seed pearls might be acceptable, but that would constitute the bulk of my jewelry. I took a deep breath and flung open the door. The kitchen was quiet as the grave. Tibby sat down and began to wash his face in the most maddeningly unconcerned fashion. Time I was in bed, I told him, and went. I'll find out what the morrow brings to Miss Reed next time.